When successful professionals are transitioning into retirement with $1 million or more saved, they're typically looking for clarity around how much money can I safely spend from my portfolio to ensure that I'm able to experience a life that I always imagined without the fear of outliving my resources in the process. But 4 common mistakes often turn what should be relatively straightforward into complexity and unnecessary confusion. Most people think that the hard part is over once they reach this point. After all, you've worked hard, you've sacrificed, you've contributed, you've built, and you've put yourself in the position where retirement is even a consideration. But the truth is that your shift from accumulation to distribution and preservation is where the real planning complexity really begins. See, the real question for people in this group is rarely about whether or not you've saved enough. It's about getting clear answers about income replacement. Once your paycheck goes away, how much money is going to be necessary to help ensure that you're able to continue the same lifestyle that you become accustomed to when you were working? How do you make sure that you pinpoint the specific income gap that may exist inside of your plan? And how do you make sure that you're able to properly align your savings and your resources in a way that's able to deliver the lifestyle that you want for as long as you live, as well as your spouse, without the fear of outliving your resources in the process? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the 4 most common retirement transition mistakes that I see made from this group, and how to ensure that you're focused on the right things that should give you the confidence to be able to enjoy your money more while preserving the wealth that you've worked so hard to build in the process. Let's dive in. Mistake number 1. Confusing investment strategy with retirement strategy. Most people that I sit down with think that target date funds, which largely represent the bulk of their investment strategy when they were working, are the responsible way to retire. After all, you set it, you forget it, it's aligned with your age, your timeline for being able to retire, and as a result, it should be well aligned with what you're hoping to accomplish during this next life stage that you're about to enter into. But while these investment strategies and target date funds may be appropriate for helping you to build and accumulate wealth while you're working, they fail to address the single most important question that every aspiring retiree ultimately faces, which is, how do I replace my working income when the paycheck stops? This lack of clarity often puts you into a position where you fall into one of 2 camps. Camp number 1 is you are fearful of every distribution and withdrawal that you take. You struggle with the psychological transition of no longer having a working paycheck coming into your bank account every month. That transition is much more difficult than a lot of people anticipate. And as a result, they dramatically underspend when they enter into retirement out of fear that they're going to spend too much or that the markets aren't going to cooperate. And as a result, they're going to put themselves in a position where they overstress their portfolio and potentially increase the likelihood of outliving the resources in the process. Camp number 2, you enter into retirement somewhat recklessly without a clear vision of how much can I afford to safely spend from my portfolio, which potentially increases the likelihood of a new risk, which is called excess withdrawal risk. This is the likelihood of potentially having to spend more than what would be considered the safe withdrawal rate. And as a result, you put additional stress on your portfolio, which dramatically increases the likelihood of running out of money over the course of your retirement. The key insight here is that retirement planning does not begin with asset allocation. It should first begin with income replacement, understanding what is going to be necessary to help replace your desired lifestyle once you actually retire. What is the income number that's going to be necessary to help support the life that you want to live, the comfort that you want to experience, and the new experiences that you want to create from a discretionary spending standpoint? Making sure that your portfolio and your other non-portfolio resources are properly aligned with helping to deliver that outcome is the thing that's going to help you sleep better at night. This is why it's so critically important to understand that once that working paycheck goes away, you have a clear process to understand Social Security claiming decisions, how to coordinate pension claiming decisions, as well as portfolio distribution decisions to help ensure that any income gaps are properly provided for, so that you never have to wonder where your next month's paycheck is going to come from. The real problem here is that your investment strategy that got you to retirement fails to address the single most important decision that you have to make in retirement, which is understanding, how do I fill my retirement income gap, and how do I ensure that my portfolio is going to be able to properly provide for the lifestyle that I hope to experience in retirement, regardless of what happens in the stock market. When you're transitioning from earning to spending, you need a concrete income planning strategy that's going to give you the confidence to understand exactly what your spending capacity is, rather than a generic allocation strategy that's going to leave you second guessing every distribution that you have to take. Mistake number 2, applying generic one-size-fits-all rules of thumb to your personal retirement situation. One of the most common mistakes that I see at this stage is that most people are familiar with general rules of thumb, things like the 4% rule, for example, that give you a starting point of understanding how much can I safely spend from my retirement savings. Many of the people that we sit down with who have saved 7 figures or more in retirement have heard of rules like the 4% rule, and they think that that applies directly to them. And as a result, they enter into this thinking that this is the hard, stringent guideline that I have to follow in order to be able to ensure that I don't outlive my assets in the process. But the fact is, the 4% rule is a general rule of thumb that does not take into account your personal situation in terms of your savings, your current age, your health, your social security, your pension, your other outside resources outside of your portfolio that you can potentially rely on, let alone all the other circumstances around what it is that you're hoping to experience and accomplish in your retirement journey. Here's the key insight that I encourage you to keep in mind here. The fact is, your portfolio does not have to provide for your entire retirement lifestyle. It only has to provide for your desired retirement income gap based on your personal goals, your priorities, and your preferences in terms of how you want your income to behave as you proceed through your retirement planning journey. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with a new client couple that we're working with. They were in their early 60s, approaching retirement quickly, and had saved over $2.5 million towards their retirement. So they felt like they were in a pretty good position overall, but they were simply unsure about how to translate their nest egg, what they had worked so hard to save and accumulate, how once that final paycheck went away, how that was going to turn into an income in retirement that was going to help to support the goals and objectives that they had in place for themselves. So we took a step back. Rather than following those general rules of thumb and saying, okay, let's just do simple back of the napkin math and saying 4% of your savings equals this much that we can spend, we actually started breaking down what a successful outcome for them looked like. We talked about what are their essential spending needs? How much does life cost today just to be able to rest their head on the pillow at night and feel good about things and know that they don't have to worry about what's going to happen in the stock market tomorrow. We nailed down what that number looked like. And then we moved on to identifying what were the specific outcomes that were necessary for them to feel great about what they were able to achieve over the next 12 to 24 months. If we were sitting down a couple years from now and looking back with the benefit of hindsight, what kind of things needed to happen for them to feel really good about the progress that had been made. And we started to get more detailed in terms of what that spending plan actually looked like. Once we got clarity around what those targets were, now we were able to make much more disciplined decisions around Social Security claiming, the role that their pension potentially played, and identifying exactly what their income gap looked like. That process also helped us to identify their personal preferences, how they wanted their income to actually behave once they entered into the stage of having to satisfy income shortfalls from their portfolio. And we identified how much of that they were willing to be flexible with. That determined their investment strategy. It ended up putting them into a position where they were able to confidently spend more than they anticipated, giving them the opportunity to travel, to help support an adult child, and do the other things that they were hoping to from a planned giving standpoint, giving to their church, giving to a charity that they really cared about, and doing the things that mattered most to them without the fear of running out of money. The key point is this. General rules of thumb are an effective starting point. They give you an idea of being able to understand where you can potentially start from, but they do not give you the detailed, straightforward analysis of understanding what is appropriate for you based on your personal goals, your personal priorities, your personal timelines, and the preferences for how you want your money to behave in the process. Once we get clarity around that, all the rest of the pieces tend to line up because now they're aligned with your life desires and things that are most important to you. Mistake number 3. The safety paradox. There's an interesting dynamic that a lot of people face when they enter into retirement. Oftentimes, people find themselves on one end of the spectrum or the other. Some people enter into retirement carrying that same investment philosophy that got you to the dance. They continue to invest in the stock market. After all, it's what gave you the opportunity to build and accumulate your nest egg. And for those folks, risk becomes a different issue. That market volatility, when you're actually distributing your assets, becomes a major risk to your opportunity to preserve wealth long term. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of people find themselves in a far too conservative position. They're terrified of experiencing that major loss. And as a result, they go to the opposite end where they are just far too conservative. And they feel like by holding a disproportionate percentage of cash that it's going to give them the safety needed to weather any storm and put themselves into a position where I don't have to worry about market volatility. The challenge here is that they put themselves into a completely different category of risk. See, that cash may give you the short-term peace of mind of knowing that I have access to the money that I need to cover any short-term emergencies as well as any short-term spending objectives that I may have in place. But it fails to account for the opportunity cost that you're leaving on the table that's going to ultimately be the thing that provides for your future cost of living increases, a standard of living that will inevitably become more expensive the older that you get. This includes things like rising healthcare costs, as well as future spending objectives and liabilities that you may not have accounted for. We solve this issue through what we call time segmentation, and we build in individual buckets that are designed to help accomplish 4 very specific objectives for you. Bucket number 1 is what we call your forever bucket. These are your paychecks. These are the things that are going to be your permanent income replacement for as long as you live. This is where Social Security claiming lives. This is where your pension optimization lives, and it's also where distribution planning lives to help ensure that any income shortfalls and gaps are ultimately provided for, not just for as long as you live, but for as long as your spouse lives. Bucket number 2 is your liquidity bucket. This is where we help to scratch the itch of helping to ensure that you have the proper amount of cash and liquidity set aside to help you not only cover any short-term potential emergencies, but also to help you sleep well at night. And that is personal to you and your situation. We want to have enough cash set aside that we understand that we have access, we can get our hands on the money if we were to need it, and it's going to help us to rest easy in the event that things go sideways in the near future. Bucket number 3 is our protection bucket. This is where we stress test the portfolio to isolate what are the single biggest points of potential loss that you face that could cost you in retirement. We isolate these things according to what are the things that are single moment life events that could potentially cost you 20% or more of your total net worth. The 3 big issues that most people face here are market events, loss of a spouse, or a major healthcare event. We want to isolate and quantify exactly what that loss potentially represents to your strategy and make sure we build in contingencies to help properly allocate and remove those issues from your plan. Finally, we build in bucket number 4, which is your long-term growth bucket. This is money that's allocated for 10 years or longer, which gives us the necessary runway to invest with a long-term retirement horizon, just like you had when you were working. The fact is, every investor's number one asset is time. And the thing that you lose when you enter into retirement is the benefit of time. So we want to be able to give you that benefit back by making sure that we have assets that are deliberately allocated into long-term growth assets that give you the opportunity to continue to grow and preserve wealth over the long term, riding out market volatility in the short term. And this brings us to mistake number 4, withdrawal sequencing confusion. This is the which bucket do I actually pull from first question. For people who have accumulated 7 figures or more towards retirement, you typically have some level of tax diversification in place between after-tax accounts, tax-deferred accounts, and tax-free accounts, which raises the question, which account do I pull from first in order to be able to successfully optimize my distribution strategy? Not having a detailed plan in place is the thing that ultimately puts you into the position of second-guessing every single distribution that you make through this process. The truth is, there is no optimal sequence. There's a lot of guiding rules of thumb, just like everything else, but the fact is, everybody's situation is different based on your individual timing for when you're hoping to retire, when you're looking to try to potentially claim Social Security, how your assets are currently allocated between after-tax accounts, tax-deferred retirement accounts, and tax-free accounts like your Roth IRA, Roth 401ks, the amount of allocation that you have, and making sure that you own the appropriate assets in the appropriate tax buckets is the thing that's going to help to drive the key decisions that are going to help to give you the best potential outcomes. Making sure that you understand how to sequence those decisions in a way that coordinates all those moving parts to help put more money in your pocket and reduce your overall tax liability in the process is the thing that's going to help to gain clarity over what is best for you and for your personal situation. The real problem here is not making the perfect decision. It's just about having a clear framework that gives you clarity around how we're making decisions, why we're making the decisions that we're making, and how they're aligned with the specific outcomes that you're hoping to experience as you go through this process. So there you have it. These are the 4 most common mistakes that I see affluent savers make as they transition from work into retirement. And they're the things that I would encourage you to focus your attention on to ensure that you have a strategy that's aligned with an outcome that is specific to you and the goals and priorities that you've established for yourself and for your family. At this stage, if you realize that moving beyond these general rules of thumb into a more personalized strategy that is unique to you and your unique goals, your unique timelines, and the things that you're hoping to experience for yourself, if that's where you are today and you want to take that next step, here's what I would encourage you to do next. We help successful professionals in their mid to late 50s to their early 60s transition from work to retirement, and we help them specifically focus on the key objectives of income replacement, withdrawal sequencing, bridging healthcare, and putting themselves into a position where they can find the healthy balance between enjoying their money and preserving their money. If that's you, I encourage you to click the link below, schedule a consultation where we'll be able to get deep into understanding exactly what those key targets are for you, how to align your resources with the life that you're hoping to experience, and how to do it with less doubt and more confidence. If you'd like to take advantage, click the link below, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for watching.